So, looking over what's been making business news headlines in Colombia this past week, of course, there's coverage on the U.S. Supreme Court handing Donald Trump a stunning defeat of his ad hoc tariff policy. So, for example, there's a 10% tariff on Colombian flowers, even though the U.S. doesn't produce flowers to meet domestic consumption. Still, Colombia has actually benefited to some degree from the tariffs that got struck down, which is a delight to free traders everywhere. But the tariffs overall hit other countries harder, giving Colombia a temporary competitive advantage on some export products. At this point, let's take a quick pause to remember Willie Colon, the salsa legend. He died today, Saturday, February 21st, 2026. He wasn't Colombian, but loved in Colombia and everywhere. He's had fans all over the world. I'm a fan. He actually was born in New York City. A lot of people don't know that. He was born in the Bronx, so he's a New Yorker. And I bet a lot of you all are surprised by that. But like millions of others, like I said, a big loss today, so descansa en paz, Don William. So rest in peace, Willie Colon. El Colombiano, the Medellin-based daily, has a report showing that Colombia is paying one of the highest interest rates in the world due to the fiscal policies of the current administration that had for the past 3 years followed a tax and borrow and spend methodology. President Gustavo Petro has declared a fiscal emergency and broken Colombia's budgetary rules that are designed to prevent deep deficit spending. With the rising debt leading to a worsening risk profile for the country, and now among major economies, only Russia, Brazil, and Egypt pay higher interest rates on 10-year bonds. Colombia is now paying 7.1% compared to 7.7% for Russia, 8.7% for Brazil, and 10% for Egypt. Very high interest rates that puts Colombia into the risky credit category. Now, at the El Dorado International Airport in Bogota, there was a near miss when a Colombian Air Force helicopter crossed the path of an Airbus A320 operated by LATAM Airlines that was about to take off. The jet had to make an emergency stop. It was on the takeoff roll, and they literally had to slam on the brakes, and that blew out the plane's tires. Fortunately, nobody was hurt. That's a big, it was really a close call. And we remember, was it just last year? It might have been 2 years ago when we had that collision between a military helicopter in Washington, D.C. and I think it was an MD-20. It was a jet that was coming in on final approach for landing. And that was the worst, I think it might be the worst aircraft accident in terms of fatalities in the U.S. for at least 2 decades. But fortunately, in Colombia, the plane was able to abort the takeoff and miss the helicopter. Now, the Colombian Air Force is saying that the helicopter was following air traffic control instructions, so they're saying that it wasn't their fault. Air traffic control has issued a statement that they are investigating the matter. And remember, as we reported in Finance Colombia last July, Bogota's air traffic controllers got in big trouble for bringing one of the controllers' teenage kids into work, which that by itself is probably great, but they let him take over the controls in direct live commercial traffic at one of the busiest airports in the entire continent. You can read about that in Finance Colombia. We reported on that last July. Catherine Miranda from Colombia's Green Party presented an anti-corruption exposé of the Gustavo Petro administration's project to build 19 hospitals, and having already paid out, according to her, 157 billion pesos, just under 43 million US dollars in construction advances, but many of these hospitals, if not most of them, are 0% complete. So they've paid out money for construction, but there's no hospitals. In her words, some of these projects have advanced 0%. They haven't laid a single brick, though they supposedly started these projects in 2023. The question is clear. Where's the money, she asks. Speaking of hospitals and healthcare, there's national indignation over this past week over the death of Kevin Arley Acosta Pico, a 7-year-old kid who fell off his bike, but he has hemophilia. Now, remember, Petro has been trying to nationalize healthcare in Colombia and eliminate the EPS structure. You have the way it works in Colombia. Now, there's private insurance, which, if you can afford it, it's great. And EPS is sort of a private insurance, but they kind of act as healthcare intermediaries. So what happens is, let's say you have a job and you work at the bank. Then you will choose one of the EPS, which stands for Entidad Prestador de Salud. So it's a health providing entity. And the EPS is kind of an intermediary. They take the money from payroll contributions and from your contributions. If you're an independent worker, you can pay for it yourself. And so you join one of these EPS. It's kind of like a PPO, what we have in the U.S. There's some differences technically and structurally, but basically you pay into this EPS, and then the EPS has a network with all the doctors and everybody. So you have your health plan. So the EPSs provide health plans, and the rate is sort of fixed. So it's not like one plan costs more than the other. So the employer pays a certain amount. No matter what plan you choose, you pay a certain amount. And then there are differences in quality. There are differences in management, of course. And so then the EPS manages the payments between you and, let's say, the hospital or the doctor or the clinic. And so these are entities. They sort of, basically, they're health plan operators. Okay, but Petro has wanted to eliminate these and move to a universal government system, single payer system, where the government is in charge of all health care. So basically, you have to go through the government unless you can afford a private health plan, which I believe would still exist. But Petro, during his last 3 years of his administration, has been going to battle, really trying to get his hands on the healthcare system to change it to this government owned or government provided system. And he hasn't been able to. Congress has resisted him, as well as large parts of the population. But what he has been able to do is to go after some of the weaker EPS systems, the ones that he's been able to use the excuse and say, hey, these are financially weak, so we're going to take it over like a government receivership, or say that, hey, they're insolvent, so we need to take them over as a government entity. So they got their hands on one of these EPS called Nueva EPS. So Nueva EPS is one of the EPS systems. And so the problem, though, is that since the government has taken it over, and the idea is that, okay, I can take over these weakest ones, and if we can't overhaul everything in Congress, I'll just kind of take them over one by one. But things have gotten worse. Nueva EPS, yeah, you could say that they were in trouble. You could say that they had some financial issues. They weren't bankrupt, but they were. You could say, I think it's fair to say they were struggling. But then they still were providing the services. But the patients who are stuck with that EPS have complained that things have gotten worse rather than better, and people are not getting their care. Providers aren't being paid, and according to so this kid, he was in his family was in Nueva EPS, and they can't get the EPS that's controlled by the government, can't get the basic fundamental medicines that he needs, being a hemophiliac. And so according to Sergio Robledo, who's the president of the Colombian Hemophiliac League, there are more than 40 other patients who are hemophiliacs who aren't getting their medicines just from this one EPS that the government's controlling. And so then Petro his administration has the gall to try to put the blame on the kid's mother for letting him ride a bike. Now, hemophiliacs are allowed to ride bikes. Of course, should be careful. But the EPS doesn't have the medicine. And rather than admit the deficiencies or even deflect and investigate the matter, they blame the mother. Right there on Twitter, I hope that we can give you a brief screenshot. It's in Spanish, of course, but they don't even accept the responsibility for the people who are, as we can see, literally dying. As they say, children are dying. A lot of times that phrase is used in hyperbole, but in this case, it's real. So it gets worse. The Gustavo Petro government has been taking heat for giving a gift of 2 ambulance boats to the San Jose Hospital in Maicao, Colombia. So what could, well, that's good, right? We're, hey, we can, they're making progress, right? Sounds good until you realize that Maicao is in the desert near the Venezuelan border. Maicao is a small town. I've been there. Rough place. It is a dry and dusty place that has no river, no lake, no water, no ocean. It's in the desert. I mean, literally, there are cacti. Is that, yeah, cacti, multiple cactus, not cactuses, right? So the closest serious body of water to Maicao in Colombia is the Atlantic Ocean, but it's an hour away in Riohacha, La Guajira's capital and largest city. So you have these 2 boats worth about $500,000 U.S. delivered to the desert. Forgive the pun, but something's fishy. Remember that this is the same impoverished department, La Guajira, where this administration purchased tanker trucks to deliver water, but deliberately overpaid by double to divert money to a congressional bribery slush fund. And still, even though they purchased the trucks, they never got delivered and set unused until the scandal broke. If you go to Finance Colombia, you can read about the UNGRD scandal. And it's been a mess. There have been fatalities. A guy, and this kind of happened, which sort of uncorked the scandal, and people started looking around. But one of the business people involved was killed. And then we investigate, well, not we, but just Colombian media generally investigate and find this huge scandal. And now several people are in jail. You had bagmen, and this was high up in the administration, and Petro hasn't been touched. Nobody has outed him or fingered him or said that he was involved, but several people in his administration are now in jail and continue to face charges based on this big scandal. So let's see what happens with the desert ambulance boats. It's kind of sad because the government says that they're facing budget deficits and they don't have enough money and Congress won't approve budgets. But then we see when they get money, they go and do something like this. You deliver ambulance boats to a hospital literally in the desert with no water for at least, if you drive for an hour, you get to Riohacha, which is the department, like the state or the province, the department capital, but they don't give the boats to Riohacha, where it's on the ocean. Okay, I've been there several times, and it's the capital of La Guajira department, and it's right there on the Caribbean coast of the Atlantic. But no, they give the boats to a small town, not the capital on the coast, but a small town in the desert, an hour away on the Venezuelan border. What do you think about that? Let me know in the comments. This week, we will find out what happens next in the standoff between President Gustavo Petro and Colombia's Council of State, which has declared his decreed 23% increase in the country's minimum wage invalid and illegal. So in Colombia, you have the Consejo de Estado, the Council of State. And then you also have the Corte Constitucional, the Constitutional Court. And you also have the Corte Suprema, the Supreme Court. It sounds confusing because, like, compared to, and I don't know, let me know where you are, how these things work, how the courts work. But in the U.S., you just have the Supreme Court, right? And the Supreme Court's the Supreme Court. And then you have, under it, you have appellate courts, which are like intermediate courts, and such and such. But in Colombia, no. You have these 3 top entities. So the Consejo de Estado, the Council of State, is the court over, you could say, the executive branch. So they will rule and supervise over and can nullify actions taken by the executive branch, the presidency. So if, like in this case, Petro makes a decree, then the Council of State can say, no, that decree is invalid because it's unconstitutional or it violates this or that. If the government did something and you had a claim against the government, so the government, I don't know, like the case earlier we talked about with the air traffic control. And if the air traffic control screws up because they're under the executive branch, so they're letting kids direct airline traffic, or they mess up when it comes to this near miss with the helicopter and the LATAM flight, then the highest court that would deal with that, because the Aerocivil or the air traffic control operations are under the executive branch of government. So that would go under Consejo de Estado. Then you have, and I'm not a lawyer, so if I get this wrong, and I'm not even Colombian, so if I get this wrong, let me know if you're Colombian or if you're a lawyer or if you're, Joe Sixpack, let me know if I screw it up. Then you have the Corte Constitucional, the Constitutional Court. They specifically will evaluate and can overrule, and they can determine if a law is illegal or unconstitutional. And a law compared to a decree, a law meaning it's passed by Congress. Okay, so the Constitutional Court is going to say, all right, what Congress did is valid or invalid or constitutional or unconstitutional. Council of State will say what the presidency did or some presidential government agency did was correct or not correct. Or if you have a claim against the government, it's the Council of State that will hear that claim. Then you have the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is the top court when it comes to crimes and torts. So if you are fighting, if you're a defendant in a criminal case, then the top court that's going to hear your case is going to be the Supreme Court. I imagine you could have a situation where you could try to take it to the Constitutional Court because you might say, hey, this law that I'm being charged with is unconstitutional. Different story. But the Supreme Court is where crimes and torts. So Party A is suing Party B. This company is suing that company. The highest court of the land is going to be the Supreme Court. So in Colombia, you have three top bodies: the Council of State over the administrative and over the executive branch, the Constitutional Court over the legislature, and then the Supreme Court over, well, crimes and torts, your run-of-the-mill lawsuits. So anyway, Petro issues Decree 159 of 2026. What happens here is they'll make a law in Colombia and they'll say this law is a decree, because this is not really a law, it's a presidential decree. A law, strictly speaking, is going to come from the Congress, right? So the 159th decree that was issued this year sets the minimum wage to increase. It's like 2 million pesos. There's like like $1.7 million per month, and then there's like a $250 or $300 or peso transportation subsidy as well. So effectively 2 million pesos a month, which is, the exchange rate's down, so that's going to be between $500 and $600 a month. But so Petro issues this decree. What happens is generally the representatives of labor, your major unions, will get together, and then the business gremios or the business associations, and they try to come to an agreement. They tend not to. But the idea is that they get together and say, okay, we will negotiate and we'll agree on an increase of 6% or 5% or 4% or whatever. And more often than not, it seems like they don't come to an agreement, and then the president, when they don't come to an agreement, the president gets to set something. But Law 278 of 1996 says that the increase has to be, you can't just make it up porque sí, like they say in Spanish. You can't just make it up because you think it's cool or nice. It has to be based on kind of technocratic criteria. So You have to look at the inflation rate. You have to look at cost of living adjustments. You have to look at all these different factors, and it has to be based on a technical assessment, a justifiable assessment of we believe that the minimum wage should be reset because of these technical economic factors, right? There's probably some wiggle room in there for you to make it a little bit higher or a little bit lower, but you can't just go and say, let's double it because I'll get a lot of votes, or let's double it because I am a utopian or something. You can't just make it up and have it to be whatever you want it. So now what has happened is that the Council of State has said, no, this 23% rate is arbitrary and unsupported by any kind of let's say economic research or economic findings. Petro has said it's based on what the UN's International Labor Organization calls a living wage, but that doesn't have any. That's like, okay, that actually was even based on a family of 4 with 2 income earners. So they're saying, and I don't have the number, but they're saying that let's say it's 2 million pesos a month, okay, which is what Petro wanted to increase the minimum wage to. Then in that case, a family of 4, 2 adult wage earners, both working, and 2 children need to bring in 2 million pesos a month to meet a minimum standard of, I guess you could say, survivability or living wage, okay? It's not based on an individual income earner. So the Council of State said that even if you use that ruling, which has no force of law, you can't use it. You can't use what the ILO says for any kind of legal basis in Colombia. It's just like a UN organization that comes up with studies. But still, even if they used it, it would be wrong because it's based on a 4-person family with 2 income earners. Still, anyway, so last week they overruled and they said, look, this 23% isn't going to cut it. So they throw it back to the government and say, come back with something more reasonable that is justifiable and that is defensible. Now, what's going to happen, we'll see. Looking at kind of Petro's style of governance and personality, he might very well try to be obstinate and, dare them to act and say, I'm going to keep it at 23%. That's one thing that could happen. He could come back and just kind of cave in and say, okay, we'll make it 13%, which still would be very high. But he could capitulate or go back and try to enlist support of both the unions and the business community, which I find unlikely based on he doesn't tend to operate that way. So at any rate, this 23% is it's been a big shock to employers and really the entire economy, because what happens in Colombia, and it was interesting because Petro acted all surprised when this happened. He raised the minimum wage, okay, in January, 23%. Then everybody else, all the stores and just kind of, stuff out there in the market started raising prices by 23%. And he acted surprised that they would do that. I guess he thought that it wasn't going to have any kind of inflationary effect. But that's basic economics. And so the problem for employers, not just employers, but even individuals, even if you don't make minimum wage, what happens in Colombia is that, let's say, so a lot of fees are set by minimum wage. So they'll say SMMLV is like a abbreviation. And so if you get a traffic ticket, the fine will be something like 15 days SMMLV, minimum wage. So half a month's minimum wage. So you might get a traffic ticket, and that traffic ticket is going to be a half of a month's minimum wage. And so whenever the minimum wage changes, the traffic ticket fine automatically changes. A lot of times lawyers, especially consumer-facing lawyers, will set their fees based on, okay, I'm going to charge you 2 minimum wages as a retainer to take your case. So all of these fines just naturally change. A lot of the administration fees and big condo communities and how much you pay are based on some kind of fraction or multiple of minimum wages. And so when Petro increases the minimum wage by 23%, everything else jumps by 23% because they're tied to what the minimum wage is. So now the uncertainty is that nobody can plan or make business decisions. If you're running a call center and need to quote to a foreign client, and labor is the biggest part of your cost, what do you quote? Do you say, okay, I'm going to quote 23% more, which is a huge jump, and then the jobs don't come to Colombia or they leave Colombia, so you're not really in the end helping the poor Colombians, because what happens is you actually drive more people into the informal economy. Employers say, hey, I can't pay 23% more, so they'll either pay you under the table, which is going to be less, and now you're not paying into the EPS system that we talked about earlier, or paying into the pension system, or getting those types of protections like IRL, which is like workers' compensation. And it actually makes the problem worse. So on the face of it, oh, I'm going to get 23% more. One, you go to the grocery store and everything costs 23% more. Guess what? It doesn't work out that way. So we'll see what happens this week coming and how Petro reacts to the rejection of his decree by the Council of State. The Jeffrey Epstein scandal has reached Colombia. El Tiempo has published an explosive report having analyzed the Epstein files that have been released, and there are photos with Ghislaine Maxwell arm in arm with former Colombian President Andres Pastrana. So we've got Epstein's girlfriend or ex-girlfriend, widow. She's not a widow because they weren't married. But Ghislaine Maxwell, however you pronounce her name, who's in jail now in the United States for trafficking. I want to be careful and not run afoul of any kind of keyword censorship here. But we all know who Epstein and Maxwell are, right? But now we have El Tiempo has surfaced these old photographs with Ghislaine Maxwell and then former Colombian President Andres Pastrana. More trouble for him. He has had a kind of a doubtful reputation in a lot of quarters forever since he was a presidential candidate. But they gave her a Colombian Air Force uniform. There's another photograph with the retired Colonel Julio Cesar Londoño Giraldo. Julio Cesar Londoño Giraldo. So a Air Force colonel. They've got Ghislaine Maxwell dressed up in her own Colombian Air Force uniform. And she has said in the past that, and I guess people didn't believe her, that she had access to Colombian aircraft and helicopters and even got to fly them. But I don't know, people didn't believe her, but she's made this statement herself. And I mean, we don't see her flying a plane, but here we go. We've got photographs with her in a Colombian Air Force uniform with the then president, not the current president, but Pastrana, and with this Air Force colonel, now retired. El Tiempo uncovered more troubling finds, including a Colombian witness who was acting on behalf of his grandmother, a man who said, look, my grandmother worked for Epstein at his New York residence and had possession of illegal material that she sneaked out of the house regarding children. But she did this because she wanted to take evidence and turn him in. And she tried to report it to NBC, not NBC, to ABC News anchor Mark Remillard, but he didn't want to take possession of this stuff because then he's in possession of something that can get you in a lot of trouble, right? So, and he's like, look, I'm not a law enforcement authority guy. So the man says that he and his grandmother were being threatened by Epstein's lawyers back then, who are now the executors of his estate, Darren Indignation and Richard Kahn. They were named in this El Tiempo report. We'll put the link in the notes. They then contacted the U.S. Attorney's Office in 2020 to turn over these materials. It doesn't say what, if anything, happened after that. But this Colombian grandmother and her grandson tried to turn Epstein in, and they even had the goods. They even had the evidence on him back then. There were other Colombians mentioned, such as an interrogation by Bradley Edwards, attorney for 200 of Epstein's victims, who was interrogating the accountant of the modeling agencies run by Epstein's friend Jean-Luc Brunel, who was also found dead in 2020 in France. Edwards is asking the accountant about a 13-year-old unnamed Colombian girl under the protection of Jean-Luc Brunel. Girls from Brazil and Ecuador are also mentioned. Now remember, they're going through El Tiempo and then lots of other dedicated people, journalists and the public, and I guess they're open, and whoever wants to comb through them can do so. A lot of the information is redacted. So you might find correspondence like El Tiempo did in these cases, where you can look at the emails that were sent when the grandmother and her grandson wrote an email to the FBI or to the Justice Department, or then in this case with this legal deposition between the lawyer Bradley Edwards, and he's interviewing this accountant. So we have this dialogue. We don't necessarily know, at least it's not in the El Tiempo report, what happens afterwards. So there were girls also mentioned from Brazil and Ecuador. Then El Tiempo identified another Colombian victim of Epstein who was a student at Universidad Rosario in Bogota. She met with the FBI in 2008 and was offered support for victims of crime. And so the U.S. has some programs. It's like, okay, you were a victim of this crime in the U.S., so here are some things that we can do for you. It appears from reading the material that was shared, she didn't think it was a big deal at the time. Maybe she was there voluntarily and didn't seem to pursue things beyond that exchange. In another instance, a 22-year-old Colombian woman back in 2017 was applying for an administrative job with Epstein. Her name was actually revealed in the documents. I am not going to repeat it because people probably should leave her alone and not bother her. And she was a student at Louisiana State University and very enamored with the idea of having the opportunity to move to New York City. So she was trying to get a job. And in this email, it was kind of like a cover letter, and she was applying for a job with Epstein's organization. And I think it would be a blessing if she ended up not getting the job. But we don't know at the end whatever happened, at least with the article. I'm sure that there are people out there who are, hopefully not. They should just leave her alone unless she wants to come public and speak out. But this was almost 10 years ago. She just was applying for a job. It doesn't look like she had any notion to all of this, the things that were going on. So I want to ask you something, and aside from the usual like and subscribe, which tells the platform that you want more of this, I'm asking you not to trust the algorithm. Everybody says these social platforms and web platforms and all have, whether it's a podcast or how Apple or Spotify or whoever presents a new podcast to you, or how YouTube shows you a video. These are all algorithms, and I'm asking you not to trust the algorithm, because some ornery politician, whether it's Alvaro Uribe or Gustavo Petro or Donald Trump or Xi Jinping, might get pissed off and pull strings to get us deplatformed and have us disappeared from the platform. If not worse, all of a sudden you come to listen and the podcast is gone and you can't find it anymore. It's not syndicated, or our YouTube channels are... And this happens all the time. Even sometimes by mistake, you see people where some AI algorithm takes it down. This actually happened to us on Facebook, one of our publications. They said, you guys are impersonating someone. I'm like, we own the company and we own the website and I can prove it. And they were like, it took 5 months to get it back. And they were like, oh, we're sorry. That actually happened to us on Facebook. And so you've probably seen cases like this when some YouTuber or podcaster just disappears. So I'm asking you to give us, not just to give us a like and subscribe like usual, or on the audio podcast, a great review, which does help. But subscribe to our newsletter, Finance Colombia. You can subscribe at fcsubscribe.com or go to financecolombia.com and you'll see the subscription form there. And we'll also put the link in the description and show notes here. We'll never share your email. We've been in business for over a decade and we never have and we never will. But that way, if anything happens, we can keep in touch with you. We can say, hey, listen, we hear that our platform disappeared off of whatever podcast, but here's where you can find us, or here's what's going on. And like I said, we will protect your privacy. We won't share your email address or your information. But yes, aside from, of course, subscribe to us here. Of course, follow us here. Of course, comment. Let me know what you think. But if you will, for you as much as for us, go ahead and subscribe to Finance Colombia. What are your thoughts on all this? It's been a big week. We haven't done a weekly recap in a little bit just because there's a lot of things going on. But if you're on YouTube, let us know in the comments. And if you're listening via audio podcast, a review is going to help spread the word. And tell your friends and forward this to somebody who is interested. We're going to do more. A lot more coming up this year, and I'm very excited. And so thank you all for your attention and for your time.